Hello, everyone. Today you're going to be reading Chapter 5, The Red Circle. So I figured I'd record myself reading it to you. It's only about 6 pages, so that's good. After you do that, I'm going to go over what you're going to do for your classwork today, which is a couple of questions about the chapter. So first I'm going to read, and then we're going to go over the questions together. Here we go. At USC, Louis spent mornings in class and afternoons training. In the evenings, he and his teammates wedged into his 31 Ford and drove to Torrance for Louis Zamperini's spaghetti. In his spare time, Louis crashed society weddings, worked as a movie extra, and harassed his housemates with practical jokes, replacing their deviled ham with cat food and milk with a laxative. He pursued girls by all means necessary, once landing a date by hurling himself into a girl's car, then pretending to have been struck. On the track, he was unstoppable. Focused on the 1940 Tokyo Olympics, he smashed record after record. By spring of 38, he whittled his mile time down to 4 minutes 13 seconds, some 7 seconds off of the world record, which now stood at 4 minutes 6 seconds and .4. "There's the next mile champion," said Glenn Cunningham to reporters one afternoon. "When he concentrates on his distance, he'll be unbeatable." The reporters turned to see who Cunningham was looking at. It was Louis, blushing to the roots of his hair. In the 1930s, runners were beginning to toss around the idea of a 4-minute mile. Most observers, including Cunningham, had long believed it couldn't be done. In 1935, after studying data on human structural limits, Cunningham's legendary coach proclaimed it impossible. "The fastest a human could run a mile," he wrote, "was 4 minutes 1 second, .6. Pete disagreed. He was certain Louis had a 4-minute mile in him. Louis had always laughed this off, but in May of 1938 he reconsidered. His coach forbade him to run hills in the mistaken belief it would damage his heart, but Louis didn't buy the warnings. Every night he climbed the Los Angeles Coliseum fence and ran the stairs until his legs went numb. By June his body was humming, capable of speed and stamina beyond anything he'd ever known. He began to think Pete was right and he wasn't alone. Running experts published articles suggesting Louis could be the first 4-minute man. Even Cunningham agreed. In June, Louis arrived at the National Collegiate Athletic Association Championships in Minneapolis. Gushing with confidence, he babbled to everyone about his training, his strategy, and how he was gunning for 4 minutes. Word spread that Louis was primed for an epic performance. On the night before the race, a coach visited Louis, his face grim. He said other coaches were ordering their runners to injure Louis. Louis dismissed him, certain no one would do such a thing. And there he is there. There. He was wrong. Halfway through the race, just as Louis was about to take the lead, several runners shouldered in around him, boxing him in. The man beside him swerved and stomped on his foot, impaling Louis' toe with his spike. Then the man in front kicked back, cutting Louis' shins. A third man elbowed Louis' chest so hard he cracked Louis' rib. The crowd gasped. Bleeding and in pain, Louis was trapped. For a lap and a half he ran in the cluster of men, restraining his stride to avoid running into the man ahead. At last, nearing the final turn, he saw a tiny gap. He burst through, sprinted to the lead, and his shins streaming blood and his chest aching, won easily. He slowed to a halt, bitter and frustrated. When his coach asked him how fast he thought he had gone, he said he couldn't have beaten 4:20. The race time was posted. From the stands came a woo! Louis had run the mile in 4 minutes 8 seconds, .3. It was the 5th fastest outdoor mile ever run, missing the world record by 1.9 seconds. His time would stand at the NCAA record for 15 years. Weeks later, Japan withdrew as Olympics host, and the 1940 Games were transferred to Finland. Louis rolled on, winning every race in the 1939 school season. In early 1940, in an indoor miles against America's best runners, he was magnificent, twice beating Cunningham and getting progressively faster. In February, he ran a 4 minute 8 second .2 6/10 of a second short of the fastest indoor mile ever run. 2 weeks later, he scorched a 4 minute 7 second .9. With the Olympics months away, Louis was peaking at the idle moment. Far away, history was turning. In Europe, Hitler was preparing to conquer the continent. In Asia, Japan's leaders had designs of equal magnitude. Poor in natural resources, its economy floundering, Japan was struggling to support a growing population. Eyeing their nation's resource-rich neighbors, Japan's leaders saw the prospect of economic independence and more. Central to the Japanese identity was the belief that Japanese was mankind's superior race, with the divine right to rule inferior Asians. Moved by economic need and a sense of destiny, Japan's leaders planned to conquer the Far East. That paragraph right there is very important. It might lead to your questions, so pay attention. For decades, Japan's military-dominated government had been preparing for its quest, crafting a muscular army and navy, and, through a military-run school system that violently drilled children on Japan's imperial destiny, shaping its people for war. Most ominously, its army encouraged and celebrated extreme brutality in soldiers. Now again, that paragraph is pretty important. In the late 1930s, Germany and Japan were ready. In 1937, Japan sent its armies smashing into China. 2 years later, Hitler invaded Poland and war began in Europe. America was pulled into both conflicts. In Europe, its allies lay in Hitler's path. In the Pacific, its ally China was being ravaged by the Japanese, and its territories of Hawaii, Wake, Guam, and Midway, as well as its Commonwealth of the Philippines, were threatened. The world was falling into catastrophe. On the dark day in 1940, the crisis reached into Louis's life. Hitler and his Soviet allies had unleashed their armies on Europe, and the continent was exploding into total war. Finland was reeling. Her Olympic stadium partially collapsed by Soviet bombs. The Olympics had been canceled. Louis spent the summer of 1940 working as an aircraft factory welder and mourning his lost Olympics. America slid toward war. In Europe, Germany was routing America's allies. In the Pacific, Japan was tearing through China and moving into mainland Southeast Asia. To stop Japan, President Franklin Roosevelt declared an embargo, a trade ban, on war-making materials. Soon he'd declare an oil embargo, freeze Japan's assets in America, and finally ban all trade with Japan. Still, Japan stormed onward. Watching fighter planes soaring over his work hangar, Louis felt a pull. He was still feeling it when Congress passed a bill requiring all men to register for the military draft. Those who enlisted before being drafted could choose their service branch. Louis joined the Army Air Corps. In November 1941, he arrived at a flight school in Houston. The Air Corps was making him a bombarder. Early on a Sunday morning, a few weeks later, a pilot guided a small plane over the Pacific. Below, a dark sea gave way to a strand of white, waves slapping Hawaii's Oahu Island. Below Pearl Harbor, headquarters of the United States Pacific Fleet, was beginning to stir. At Hickman Field, soldiers were washing a car. At the officers' club, men were wrapping up a poker game. In the barracks, 2 men were having a pillow fight. Outside, a sergeant was peering through the camera lens at his son. Many sailors were sleeping in the warships swaying in the harbor. On the deck of the USS Arizona, men were assembling to raise flags, a Sunday morning tradition. Far above them, the pilot sent a flare, skidding green across the sky. Behind him, 180 warplanes emblazoned with Japan's red circle emblem dove for Pearl Harbor. On the Arizona, the men looked up. In the barracks, one of the men in the pillow fight suddenly collapsed. He was dead, a 3-inch hole blown through his neck. His friend ran to the window and saw a building heave upward and crumble down. A dive bomber had crashed straight into it. There were red circles on its wings. In Texas, Louis was in a theater watching a matinee. The screen went blank. Light flooded the theater, and a man hurried forward. "Is there a fire?" Louis thought. "Servicemen must return to their bases," the man said. "Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor." Louis sat there, eyes wide and mind fumbling. America was at war. He grabbed his hat and ran from the building. And that, my friends, is part 1 of the book and chapter 5. So your work today, and like I said, I did point out a few paragraphs that are going to be very important for you. Your work for today is to do chapter 5 questions. There's only 5 of them. So your first one, obviously, is really easy, is what is the main idea of this chapter? What are they talking about? What is being discussed? What is happening to Louis? Where is he? What is he doing? The next one would be, what reasons does Hildebrand give for Japan's plan to conquer or get new land? They said that in paragraph 4 on page 44. Paragraph 3 on page 44, sorry. Number 3, according to Hildebrand, what belief was central to the Japanese identity? So they talked about how they were as a country. What were they like as a country? What did they believe in? That is on page 44, also in paragraph 3. Number 4, what role does violence and brutality play in the Japanese identity according to Hildebrand? Hildebrand is the author. And that is also on page 44, paragraph 4. And the last question is, how did the situation with Germany affect Louis directly? So how was he affected by having something happen in Germany and the war going on? How was he affected by that? What happened to him because of that? And that is on page 45, paragraphs 1 and 2. If you have any questions, let me know. But hopefully you benefit from me reading it to you as well as going over the questions. I'll be around all day to help you guys with that. Make sure all your questions are done. I don't want to see any blanks. I don't want to see one-word answers. I want to see full, complete sentences for each of your answers. Make sure you restate the question and make sure they're all done. A lot of you are getting zeros right now in Genesis, and your grades are falling very, very quickly because you are not doing the work and you're not doing it completely. So make sure you're doing that. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next week. No, not. I just messed that up.